The invisible girl, Riley Monroe, had perfected the art of being invisible. At 23 years old, she moved through the glass corridors of Hartfield Technologies like a whisper, barely noticed by the ambitious professionals who rushed past her each morning. Her intern badge hung from a lanyard that felt heavier than it should, a constant reminder that she occupied the lowest rung of the corporate ladder. For 4 months, Riley had kept her head down, completed her assignments without complaint, and avoided drawing attention to herself. The marketing department buzzed with energy and competition, a world where confidence seemed to matter more than competence. Riley had neither in abundance, or so she believed. She arrived early every Tuesday, just as the sun painted the lobby floors with golden light. The morning routine was comforting in its predictability. Check emails, organize files, prepare coffee for the senior associates, and stay out of everyone's way. It was a simple existence, safe and small. A moment of crisis, the marble lobby of Hartfield Technologies gleamed under crystal chandeliers, reflecting the success of a company that had built its reputation on innovation. Riley was crossing toward the elevators when she heard the receptionist's voice rising in frustration. "Sir, I'm really sorry, but I don't understand what you need. Can you write it down, maybe?" Riley's steps slowed. She turned to see a man in his 40s standing at the reception desk, his hands moving in graceful, deliberate patterns. His face held an expression Riley knew too well, a mixture of patience and resignation. It was the same look her younger sister Hannah wore when the world forgot to make space for her. The man was clearly deaf, trying to communicate through sign language that the receptionist couldn't understand. Other employees walked past, glancing briefly before hurrying on to their important meetings and pressing deadlines. Nobody stopped. Nobody helped. Riley felt her heart squeeze tight in her chest. She was nobody special, just an intern who filed paperwork and fetched lunch orders. This wasn't her responsibility, yet her feet carried her forward anyway, pulled by a force stronger than fear. Breaking the silence, her hands lifted, trembling slightly as she shaped the words she had learned years ago. "Hello, sir. My name is Riley. How can I help you?" The man's face transformed instantly. Relief and gratitude flooded his features as he signed back. "Thank you so much. I'm David Park. I have a meeting scheduled with the marketing director, but I can't seem to make anyone understand." Riley's fingers moved with growing steadiness as muscle memory took over. She had spent countless hours learning sign language when Hannah was diagnosed as profoundly deaf at age 7. Their parents had been overwhelmed, unsure how to bridge the communication gap. Riley, then only 13, had taken it upon herself to learn. Staying up late with online tutorials and practice videos, she had learned because love demanded it, because watching her little sister feel isolated in her own home was unbearable, because some things mattered more than being comfortable. "Let me check on your appointment and help you find the right office." Riley signed, then turned to the receptionist. "He has a meeting with the marketing director." "Can you confirm the appointment?" "For David Park." The receptionist, looking relieved, quickly checked the system. "Yes, he's scheduled for 9:30. Conference room be on the 7th floor." Riley interpreted the information, and David's shoulders relaxed. "You are very kind," he signed. "It's rare to find someone who understands. The price of kindness," Riley was about to offer to escort David to the conference room when a sharp voice cut through the lobby like a knife. "Well, isn't this touching?" Cassandra Price emerged from the elevator bank, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor. She was everything Riley wasn't. Confident, polished, and ruthlessly ambitious as a senior marketing associate. Cassandra had made it clear that she viewed interns as barely worthy of acknowledgement. "Riley, right? The intern?" Cassandra's smile was cold and calculated. "I didn't realize we were paying you to play translator in the lobby. Don't you have actual work to do?" Riley's face flushed hot. Several employees had stopped to watch the exchange, and she felt their curious stares like physical weight. "I was just helping Mr. Park find his meeting," Riley said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "How noble," Cassandra replied, her tone dripping with mockery. "Well, we have professional interpreters for client meetings. This isn't some charity project for you to practice your hobbies on. You're overstepping boundaries that exist for good reasons." David's expression darkened as he read the hostile body language, even without hearing the words. Riley's hands began to shake as she interpreted a softened version of the exchange. Unable to bring herself to translate Cassandra's full cruelty, "Mr. Park is an important potential client," Cassandra continued, addressing the small crowd that had gathered. "And interns don't interface with clients. It's that simple. Riley, I suggest you get back to whatever filing you're supposed to be doing." Riley wanted to disappear into the floor. This was exactly what she had feared, exactly why she usually stayed invisible. The moment she stepped forward, the moment she tried to be more than what others expected, she was cut down. The watching. Eyes. What Riley didn't see was the figure standing near the executive elevators, partially hidden by a marble column. James Hartfield had just arrived for the day, and he had witnessed the entire exchange at 52. James had built Hartfield Technologies from a small startup into an industry leader. He was known for his sharp business instincts, his demanding standards, and his ability to read people with uncanny accuracy. Success had taught him to value competence, efficiency, and results above all else. But it had also taught him something else, something he rarely admitted even to himself. Corporate culture often crushed the very qualities that mattered most: genuine compassion, quiet courage, and the willingness to help someone simply because it was right. As he watched Riley's face flush with embarrassment, as he observed Cassandra's calculated cruelty and the crowd's passive complicity, something stirred in his chest. A feeling he had buried years ago beneath layers of professional detachment. He saw his daughter in Riley's trembling hands, saw every struggle, every moment of frustration. Every time someone had made Rachel feel small for being different, James made a decision that would change everything. The unexpected summons Rayleigh escorted David to his meeting, her confidence shattered, but her commitment to helping him unwavering. Mr. Bennett, the elderly security guard stationed near the elevators, caught her eye as she returned to the lobby. "Miss Riley," he called softly. Mr. Bennett had been a music teacher for 30 years before budget cuts had forced him into retirement, and then into security work. He possessed the rare gift of seeing potential in people that others overlooked. "Don't let anyone make you feel small for doing something beautiful," he said, his weathered face kind. "I've been watching people in this building for 5 years. What you did just now? It's the first real thing I've seen in months." His words wrapped around her like a warm blanket, but they couldn't quite dispel the cold shame that had settled in her stomach. Riley returned to her desk, certain that her brief moment of visibility had cost her more than she could afford. An hour later, her phone rang. The number on the screen made her heart stop. "Miss Monroe, this is Amanda Chen, executive assistant to Mr. Hartfield. The CEO would like to see you in his office immediately." Riley's hands went numb. In 4 months, she had never been above the 7th floor. Executive offices occupied the 20th floor, a realm so far removed from her daily reality that it might as well have been another planet. As she rode the elevator up, watching the numbers climb with dread, Riley tried to prepare herself for the inevitable. She was going to be fired. Cassandra had probably filed a complaint. Her moment of kindness had become her downfall. The elevator doors opened onto a world of polished wood, expensive art, and hushed efficiency. Amanda greeted her with a professional smile and led her down a corridor lined with photographs of company milestones and achievements. "Mr. Hartfield will see you now," Amanda said. Opening a heavy door, Riley stepped into an office that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and the space was filled with understated luxury. But what struck her most was how impersonal it felt, as if the man who worked here had deliberately removed every trace of himself from the environment. James Hartfield stood with his back to her, looking out at the skyline. When he turned, his expression was unreadable. "Sit down." "Miss Monroe," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Riley sat, her hands folded in her lap, waiting for the axe to fall. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken tension. Then James asked a question she never expected. "Why did you learn sign language?" A question that changes everything. Riley's throat felt dry as she looked up at James Hartfield. His steel-gray eyes studied her with an intensity that made her want to shrink back into her chair. This wasn't the angry reprimand she had expected. The question felt personal, probing, as if he was searching for something specific in her answer. "My sister," Riley said softly, her voice steadier than she felt. "Hannah is 16 now. She was born profoundly deaf, and for years our family struggled to communicate with her. I was 13 when I decided to learn sign language because I couldn't stand watching her feel left out of our own dinner table conversations." But something flickered across his carefully controlled expression. Riley continued, the words flowing more easily as she spoke about the person she loved most in the world. "Hannah would sit with us during family meals, and we'd all be laughing and talking, and she'd just be there, alone in the noise. My parents tried their best, but they were overwhelmed with doctor appointments and therapy sessions. I started with free online videos practicing in my bedroom mirror until my hands ached. It took me 2 years to become fluent. But it was worth it to see Hannah's face light up when she realized someone in the family could finally have real conversations with her." The weight of understanding, James walked slowly to his desk and sat down, his posture relaxing slightly. "Your dedication to your sister is remarkable, Miss Monroe. That kind of commitment speaks to character, to values that can't be taught in any business school." Riley sensed there was more beneath his words, layers of meaning she couldn't quite grasp. The way he spoke about dedication and character felt weighted with personal experience. "Tell me something," James continued, leaning forward slightly. "When you saw Mr. Park struggling this morning, what made you step forward? You must have known it could cause problems for you." Riley considered the question carefully. "I didn't really think about it, sir. I just saw someone who needed help, and I knew I could help them. It felt wrong to walk past and pretend I didn't see what was happening. Even though you're naturally shy, even though drawing attention to yourself is clearly uncomfortable for you." "Especially because I'm shy," Riley said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "I know what it feels like to be invisible, to feel like the world is happening around you instead of with you. I couldn't let Mr. Park feel that way if I had the power to change it." James was quiet for a long moment, and Riley could see something shifting behind his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice carried a gentleness that seemed at odds with his reputation as a demanding, results-driven executive. "Miss Monroe, I'm going to be honest with you. What I witnessed this morning was remarkable. Not because you knew sign language, but because you had the courage to use it despite your obvious discomfort. That combination of skill and compassion is rare." Riley felt her confusion growing. "This didn't sound like a reprimand at all. Mr. Park is here to discuss a potential partnership on a major accessibility initiative," James explained. "We've been planning this project for months. It involves creating communication tools and resources for deaf and hard-of-hearing communities. The professional interpreter we hired is excellent at translation, but after watching you this morning, I realized something important." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Technical accuracy isn't enough for this project. We need someone who understands the lived experience, someone who can bridge not just language but genuine understanding. Starting today, I want you to shadow all meetings with Mr. Park. Consider it an evaluation period." The moment of truth really left that meeting with her mind spinning, unable to process what had just happened. Instead of being fired, she had been given an opportunity that seemed impossible. But doubt crept in quickly. What if she wasn't good enough? What if her moment in the lobby had been luck and she couldn't perform under real pressure? Her fears were realized sooner than she expected. 3 days later, the marketing department gathered for the most important presentation of the quarter. David Park had returned with his team to discuss the accessibility initiative in detail. And the professional interpreter was stuck in traffic, running dangerously late. "Can't postpone," James announced to the assembled group. "This presentation has been scheduled for months, and Mr. Park's team has flown in specifically for today. We'll need to proceed without the interpreter until she arrives." Cassandra seized her moment like a predator sensing blood. "Riley's just an intern, Mr. Hartfield. This presentation involves complex technical specifications and legal terminology. She'll be out of her depth and could damage our professional credibility." James's gaze swept across the room before settling on Riley. "Miss Monroe, are you willing to interpret until our professional arrives?" Every eye in the conference room turned toward Riley. The marketing director looked skeptical. The legal team appeared concerned. Cassandra's smirk was barely concealed. Even the junior associates who usually ignored her were watching. Waiting to see if she would fail, Riley felt her hands begin to tremble. This wasn't a casual conversation in a lobby. This was a formal presentation with department heads, lawyers, financial projections, and her entire future hanging in the balance. "Yes, sir," she heard herself say, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. The Fall David Park smiled encouragingly as Riley positioned herself beside the presentation screen. The lights dimmed slightly, and the first slide appeared. It's filled with technical diagrams and industry terminology. Riley began to sign, but her nerves overwhelmed her immediately. Her hands, usually fluid and graceful, felt stiff and awkward. She stumbled over a technical term, mixing up the signs for bandwidth and frequency. David's expression shifted from encouragement to polite confusion. The presenter continued, explaining complex integration processes, and Riley fell further behind. She was trying to interpret, process, and keep pace all at once, and the pressure crushed her like a physical weight. Her hands shook visibly now. She could feel sweat beading on her forehead. She completely mistranslated a crucial point about implementation timelines. And David held up his hand, clearly lost. Muffled laughter rippled through the room. Someone whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I told you this was a mistake." Cassandra's voice cut through the awkward silence. "Perhaps we should pause until the professional interpreter arrives. We're clearly not equipped to handle this level of communication at the moment." Riley's vision blurred with tears. Her chest felt tight, and the room seemed to be closing in around her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I need a moment. Please excuse me." She fled from the conference room, barely making it to the women's restroom before the tears came in full force. This was her nightmare realized. She had been given a chance, and she had failed spectacularly in front of everyone who mattered. The voice of wisdom really locked herself in a stall, pressing her hands against her face as humiliation washed over her in waves. How had she ever thought she could be more than what she was? Cassandra had been right. She was just an intern, out of her depth. She was foolish for believing she belonged anywhere near that conference room. The bathroom door opened softly, and familiar footsteps approached. "Miss Riley?" Mr. Bennett's gentle voice called. "I know you're in there, and I brought you something." Riley opened the stall door to find the elderly security guard holding a clean handkerchief, his weathered face full of grandfatherly concern. His eyes, behind wire-rimmed glasses, held the wisdom of someone who had spent decades helping young people through their darkest moments. "How did you know I was here?" Riley asked, wiping her eyes. "I've been around long enough to recognize when someone needs a friend," Mr. Bennett said kindly. "And I wanted to tell you something important before you decide that what happened up there defines you." He gestured to the small bench near the sinks, and they sat together in the quiet bathroom, an unlikely pair finding solace in an unexpected sanctuary. "I taught music for 37 years, Mr. Bennett began, his voice taking on the cadence of a natural storyteller. "Every year, I had students who froze during their first recital. Talented kids who practiced for months but couldn't make their fingers work when they got on stage. You know what I learned?" Riley shook her head, grateful for the distraction from her own misery. The students who worried most about being good enough were always the ones who cared the most. And caring, Miss Riley, that's where real talent begins. Not in perfection, but in giving enough of yourself that failure actually hurts. "But I let everyone down," Riley protested. "Mr. Hartfield gave me a chance, and I proved I'm not capable of handling it." Mr. Bennett's eyes twinkled with knowing amusement. "Is that what you think happened? Let me tell you what I saw. I saw a young woman who was terrified but stood up anyway. I saw someone who tried something difficult and stumbled, which is exactly what happens the first time anyone tries anything worth doing. And most importantly, I saw Mr. Hartfield's face while he watched you struggle." "What do you mean?" "He wasn't disappointed, Miss Riley. He was impressed, because you didn't quit. You didn't make excuses or blame the situation. You tried your absolute best, and when it wasn't enough, you were honest about it. That's integrity, and it's rarer than you might think in this building." The unexpected request, Riley returned to the conference room 20 minutes later, her eyes still red but her composure restored. The professional interpreter had arrived and was translating smoothly. her hands moving with mechanical precision through technical terminology and legal specifications. Riley slipped quietly into a seat at the back of the room, hoping to remain unnoticed for the rest of the presentation. But as the meeting concluded, something remarkable happened that no one had anticipated. David Park stood, his presence commanding attention even in silence. Through the professional interpreter, he spoke directly to James Hartfield, but his eyes kept finding Riley across the room. "Thank you for an informative presentation," David said via the interpreter. "Your company clearly has the technical capabilities we're looking for. However, I have an unusual request before we proceed to contract negotiations." James leaned forward with interest. "Of course, Mr. Park, what do you need?" "Tomorrow, I'd like to have a private meeting to discuss the philosophical foundations of this accessibility initiative. Just myself, you, and Miss Monroe." I'd like Riley to interpret that conversation. The room went completely silent. The professional interpreter looked stunned, clearly surprised to be dismissed. Cassandra's face went pale, then flushed with barely contained anger. The marketing director appeared confused. "Are you certain?" James asked carefully. "We have an excellent professional interpreter available." David's response was immediate and unwavering. "I've worked with many interpreters over the years, Mr. Hartfield. Most translate words with perfect accuracy. But Riley translates something more important. She translates intention, emotion, and genuine understanding. That's what this project needs at its core, not just technical precision." Riley felt the ground shift beneath her feet. This man, this successful entrepreneur whose opinion carried enormous weight, was choosing her. Not, despite her vulnerability and her public failure, but somehow because of the humanity she brought to every interaction. James's expression revealed nothing. But those who knew him well might have noticed the slight softening around his eyes. "Tomorrow, then, 10 o'clock. Miss Monroe, please clear your schedule. We'll meet in my private conference room." As the meeting adjourned, Riley caught Mr. Bennett's eye across the room. The elderly security guard gave her a subtle nod and a knowing smile that seemed to say, "I told you so." The shift walking back to her desk, Riley realized something profound had happened. Her failure hadn't ended her story. Instead, it had become the very thing that proved her worth. The heartwarming truth settled over her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Authenticity mattered more than perfection. But she also sensed that tomorrow's private meeting would reveal something deeper. James Hartfield's interest in her went beyond professional competence. There was a personal dimension to his investment in this project. A pain or passion that drove his unusual decision to elevate a struggling intern, Cassandra, blocked her path near the elevators, her expression cold with barely controlled fury. "You got lucky," she hissed quietly. "But luck runs out, Riley, and when it does, I'll make sure everyone remembers that you never belonged here in the first place." Riley met her gaze steadily, and for the first time, she didn't feel the urge to shrink away. "Maybe you're right," she said softly. "But Mr. Park didn't choose me because of luck. He chose me because I care about people more than I care about looking impressive. And if that's not valued here, then maybe I don't belong. But I don't think that's true anymore." She walked past Cassandra toward the elevators, her heart pounding, but her steps steady. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to fail or succeed. But tonight, Riley Monroe went home and told her sister Hannah about the strangest, most terrifying, most hopeful day of her life. And Hannah signed back with a smile that lit up their small apartment. "I always knew you were brave. I'm glad the rest of the world is finally figuring it out." The private meeting. Riley arrived at Hartfield Technologies before sunrise the next morning, unable to sleep through the night. The city was still dark, and the building felt different in these quiet hours. Less intimidating and more like a sanctuary where important things were about to happen. She prepared obsessively, reviewing sign language vocabulary for business terms, practicing her interpretation skills, and reminding herself of Mr. Bennett's words. Caring was where real talent began. She could work with that. At 9:45, Amanda Chen escorted Riley to James's private conference room on the 20th floor. Unlike the large corporate spaces designed for presentations, this room was smaller and more intimate. Windows overlooked the city, and the morning light filled the space with golden warmth. James arrived precisely at 10, followed shortly by David Park. Both men carried themselves with the easy confidence of people accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Yet their demeanors were noticeably different from the formal presentation days before. "Good morning, Riley," James said, and she noticed he used her first name for the first time. "Thank you for being here. This conversation is going to be different from what you've experienced so far, Mr. Park, and I want to discuss something more important than technical specifications." David settled into his chair and began signing with deliberate clarity. "Riley, I want you to understand something important. This meeting, this project, it's bigger than you realize. What we're planning isn't just about accessibility technology. It's about creating a model that other companies will follow. A blueprint for genuine inclusion." Riley's hands moved smoothly as she voiced his words, her confidence growing with each gesture. She could feel the rhythm of the conversation now, the natural flow that came when pressure gave way to purpose. The deeper purpose but models require the right leaders. David continued, his expression growing serious. "People who understand inclusion not as a corporate buzzword or a legal requirement, but as a lived experience. People who have been transformed by caring for others." James leaned forward, his attention completely focused. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Park?" David's response sent shockwaves through the small room. "I'm proposing that Riley lead the entire communications initiative. Not as an assistant or junior associate, but as director of a new department within Hartfield Technologies. A department dedicated specifically to accessibility communications and inclusive design." Riley's hands froze mid-translation, her mouth falling open in shock. Director. Her. The shy intern who had been making copies and organizing files just weeks ago. It was impossible. "That's not possible," Riley whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't have the experience, the credentials, the education. I barely graduated from community college. I'm nobody." "You have something better than credentials," David interrupted gently, his hands moving with patient insistence. "You have authenticity. You've lived with the communication barriers we're trying to solve. You understand what inclusion feels like from the inside out, not from a textbook or a training seminar. The CEO's secret." James was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable as he processed David's proposal. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested this decision meant more to him than simple corporate strategy. "Mr. Park is right," James said, his words precise and deliberate. "Technical skills can be taught. Project management can be learned. But the kind of instinctive empathy Riley demonstrated in our lobby, that's not something you can train into someone. It's either genuine or it's not." He paused, and for the first time since Riley had met him, James Hartfield's carefully constructed corporate mask began to crack. His eyes held a vulnerability she had never expected to see. "There's something I need to tell you both," James continued, his voice softer now. "Something that explains why this project matters so personally to me." He stood and walked to the windows, his silhouette backlit by the morning sun. 16 years ago, my daughter Rachel was born. She's profoundly deaf, just like your sister Hannah. When the doctors told us, my wife and I were devastated. Not because Rachel was any less perfect, but because we had no idea how to give her the life she deserved. Riley felt tears prickling at her eyes as James's story unfolded. This explained everything, his emotional reaction to her story about Hannah, his personal investment in the accessibility initiative, his willingness to see potential in a struggling intern. "My wife learned sign language immediately," James continued. "She threw herself into advocacy work, connected with the deaf community, and became Rachel's fiercest champion. But I buried myself in work instead. I told myself I was providing for my family, building a secure future. The truth was, I was running away from my own fear and inadequacy." The confession James turned back to face them, and Riley saw tears glistening in his eyes. "By the time Rachel was 8, she barely wanted to communicate with me. I had become a stranger in my own home, and it was entirely my fault. My wife gave me an ultimatum: learn to connect with our daughter, or lose both of them." The room was utterly silent except for the quiet sound of Riley's interpretation. her hands translating James's pain into visual language that David could understand. "I spent the next year learning sign language," James said. "Not just the vocabulary, but really learning. I watched videos of deaf culture, attended community events, and slowly, painfully, I started to understand what I had been too afraid to see. Rachel wasn't disabled or broken. The world was broken, designed without her in mind. And I had the power to change that." He looked directly at Riley, his gaze intense with emotion. "When I saw you in that lobby helping David, when I watched you fail so publicly at the presentation and then return with such grace, I saw my own journey reflected back at me. The fear, the vulnerability, the courage it takes to try even when you might fail." Riley's hands trembled as she interpreted. Overwhelmed by the raw honesty of his confession, "This project isn't just good business," James concluded. "It's personal. It's my way of honoring Rachel and every person like her who has been made to feel visible by a world that doesn't accommodate them. And Riley, you embody exactly what this initiative needs. Someone who understands that inclusion isn't about pity or charity, but about recognizing the full humanity of every person." Sabotage attempt at contract signing ceremony was scheduled for that afternoon, and the entire company buzzed with anticipation. Word of Riley's potential promotion had spread like wildfire, and the conference room was packed with employees eager to witness the historic partnership announcement. Riley stood beside James and David, her heart pounding but her purpose clear. She had spent the lunch hour practicing with David, finding their rhythm, building confidence through repetition and genuine connection. But just as James began his opening remarks, Cassandra Price stood up from her seat near the back of the room. Her timing was calculated for maximum impact, her voice carrying clearly across the crowded space. "Excuse me, Mr. Hartfield," Cassandra interrupted with false politeness. "I apologize for speaking out of turn, but I think we need to address something important before we proceed with this partnership." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Cassandra. Riley felt her stomach drop, recognizing the predatory gleam in the other woman's eyes. "I've been with this company for 5 years," Cassandra continued, her voice steady and confident. "I've worked on dozens of high-level projects and built relationships with our most important clients. So I have to ask, why are we allowing an unqualified intern with no professional experience to lead a multi-million-dollar initiative?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several people nodded in agreement. Cassandra pressed her advantage, her words sharp as knives. "Riley is a sweet girl, and her ability to use sign language is admirable. But this is a business, not a charity. We're about to sign a contract that will affect thousands of employees and millions of dollars in investment. And we're trusting someone who failed at her first major interpretation task just yesterday? Someone who literally ran out of a presentation crying." Riley felt her face flush with humiliation, but something had fundamentally changed in her since yesterday. The old Riley would have crumbled, would have apologized and retreated. But the Riley standing in this room had been transformed by failure, by encouragement, and by understanding her own worth. The decisive defense before Riley could respond. David Park rose to his full height. His presence commanded the room more effectively than any shouted words could have, and when he began signing, his movements were sharp with controlled anger, through Riley's clear, steady interpretation. His words rang out like a bell of truth. "This company doesn't need perfection. It needs people who understand what it means to struggle, to fail, and to care enough to try again. I've worked with dozens of professional interpreters over my career. Most treat communication like a mechanical process. Words in and words out, nothing more. They're technically perfect and emotionally empty." Riley's voice remained steady as she translated, though she felt overwhelmed by his defense of her. "But Riley doesn't just interpret language," David continued. "She interprets humanity. When I speak about barriers, she conveys not just my words, but my frustration, my hope, my determination to change things. When I talk about isolation, she understands it personally, because she's watched her sister experience it. That's not luck, and it's certainly not amateur theatrics. That's a rare gift that cannot be taught in any training program." The room erupted in spontaneous applause, but David wasn't finished. He turned his gaze directly to Cassandra, his expression stern. Yesterday, Riley struggled with technical terminology in a high-pressure situation. She made mistakes and admitted them honestly. Do you know what that showed me? It showed me someone with integrity, someone who values truth over appearances. I would rather work with someone who fails authentically than someone who succeeds through arrogance and cruelty. The final truth. James stood slowly, his corporate authority filling the space like thunder before a storm. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute finality. Riley Monroe will lead communications for this accessibility initiative as Director of Inclusive Communications. A new department being created today. This decision is based on Mr. Park's expert recommendation, my own evaluation of her character and capabilities, and most importantly, on understanding what this project truly requires. He turned his gaze to Cassandra, his expression cold and professional. As for questioning business decisions in front of clients and publicly humiliating colleagues, that behavior will be addressed through proper HR channels. This meeting is about partnership and possibility, not about personal ambitions or office politics. Cassandra's face went ashen as she realized her calculated attack had backfired completely. The colleagues who had nodded along with her criticisms suddenly found other places to look, and the whispered support she had counted on evaporated. James continued, his voice softening as he addressed the room. This company was built on innovation and taking calculated risks on talented people. Riley represents both. She brings authentic understanding to an initiative that demands more than technical competence. She brings heart to a project that requires genuine empathy, and she brings courage that I've rarely seen in this industry. He looked at Riley, and his expression held warmth that transformed his entire face. You remind me of someone very important to me. Someone who taught me that real strength isn't about never failing. It's about caring enough to try, even when you might fall short. The new beginning, the contract signing proceeded with Riley interpreting flawlessly, her confidence built on foundation of purpose rather than perfection. David's team asked complex questions, and Riley navigated technical discussions with growing skill, pausing when she needed clarification and signing with fluid grace when she understood clearly. As the ceremony concluded, employees lined up to congratulate both companies on the partnership. Several approached Riley specifically, apologizing for doubting her and expressing admiration for her composure. Under pressure, Mr. Bennett appeared near the back of the room, his weathered face beaming with grandfatherly pride. I knew it all along, Miss Riley. Artists recognize other artists, and you're creating something beautiful here.